7 days. That is how long it took to record the album that seemed to predict its own maker's death. In August of 1996, Tupac Shakur walked into a Los Angeles studio and in a single week of furious sessions, laid down the darkest record of his life. He recorded it under a new name, Machiavelli, after the Italian philosopher who faked his own death. The cover shows Tupac on a cross, crucified, a target map of his own body printed inside the booklet. He titled it, The Don Killuminati, The 7-Day Theory. 1 month after those 7 days ended, he was shot in Las Vegas. He was 25 years old. That album is one of the most haunting documents in the history of recorded music, but it is not alone. Hip-hop has produced an entire graveyard of records that carry real death, real grief, and real catastrophe inside them. These are the most cursed hip-hop albums ever made. Notorious, Big, Life After Death. The title alone stops you cold. Biggie recorded this double album through 1996 while the war between East Coast and West Coast was consuming his world. He wrote songs about death constantly, but on this record the obsession went further. The cover art shows him standing in a funeral home next to a hearse, and the opening track is called Somebody Has to Die. In the lyrics he raps about dying young, about leaving behind everything he built, about the end that felt close enough to touch. On March the 9th, 1997, 16 days before Life After Death was released, Biggie was shot and killed in Los Angeles. He was 24. The album that a dead man had recorded about his own death went to number 1. It sold over 10 million copies. The eeriest detail is the track Juicy, not on this record, but its sequel in spirit, where he had already rapped about the whole world knowing his name. His second album was a prophecy he never got to hear fulfilled. Life After Death did not just survive its creator's murder, it became the biggest statement he ever made, delivered from beyond it. Here is what makes this one especially hard to process. Biggie had survived the first wave of the Coastal War. The tension that killed his friend, turned rival had passed its peak, and he was planning a return to the stage, a return to normal life, a future outside the storm. The album cover was photographed months before, but when it reached stores, the man posing beside the hearse was already gone. The fans who lined up to buy it were buying a message from the other side of the divide, and they knew it as they lifted the needle. Big L. Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous. Harlem, 1995. Lamont Coleman was possibly the most gifted punchline rapper who ever lived. His flow was relentless, his wordplay was a decade ahead of the culture, and his one and only studio album is regarded today as an underground masterpiece. But the album underperformed commercially. The label lost faith. Big L went independent, building his own path, one step away from signing with Rockefeller Records, the label that was about to turn Jay-Z into an empire. On February the 15th, 1999, Big L was shot 9 times in the face and chest on his own block in Harlem. He was 24 years old. The murder is believed to have been connected to his older brother, a case of mistaken identity or retaliation that the streets never fully explained. His second album, The Big Picture, was assembled from his recordings and released after his death. Lifestyles remains the only album he finished in his lifetime, the entire recorded legacy of one of the greatest who never got his moment. Every listen carries the weight of what should have followed. Lord Finesse, the man who discovered him, spent decades answering questions about what Big L would have become. The answer everyone settles on is the biggest one. The Rock had been in motion. Harlem had its next king. The album cover shows him leaning against a fence in his neighborhood, unbothered, a young man with time he did not have. What makes this one especially hard to process is the silence that followed. No flood of posthumous material, no vault of finished records, no second act. One perfect album, one lost follow-up, and a block in Harlem where the story stopped. The curse of Lifestyles is not that it foretold death. It is that it was the whole story, told in full, by a man who did not know the ending was already written into the beginning. Soulja Slim, Give It to M. Raw. New Orleans, 1998. James Tapp, known as Soulja Slim, was the voice of the Magnolia Projects, signed to Master P and No Limit Records at the peak of the label's dominance. Give It to M. Raw is a document of a world most people never see, raw New Orleans street rap, and on it Slim raps about death with the calm of a man who has already accepted his. On November the 26th, 2003, the night before Thanksgiving, an unknown gunman shot him 4 times on the front lawn of his mother's house. 3 shots to the chest, 1 to the face. He was 26. Here is the part that does not go away. 8 months after his death, a song he recorded with Juvenile called Slow Motion reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was the first #1 single either artist ever had. Soulja Slim heard about it from wherever the dead wait. His mother accepted the honor in his place. The man who rapped about dying in the projects got his biggest triumph as a ghost. Old dirty bastard, nigga please. Russell Jones was the most unpredictable force in the biggest group in hip-hop. Wu-Tang Clan had 9 members and ODB was the lightning inside it. His solo work was chaotic, brilliant, unhinged, and completely his own. By 1999, his life was unraveling in public. Legal trouble, bizarre appearances, an arrest that made international news when he rushed the stage at the Grammy Awards to complain that Wu-Tang was for the children. Nigga Please, released that year, captured the chaos in its final pure form. He never finished another proper studio album. On November the 13th, 2004, 2 days before his 36th birthday, would have mattered to anyone counting, ODB collapsed at a recording studio in New York. The cause was an accidental overdose of cocaine and a prescription painkiller. He had complained of chest pain that day. His last live performance, months earlier at Rock the Bells, had reunited him with the full Wu-Tang Clan. The group never replaced him. The chaos he carried was a kind of genius nobody else could hold, and when he dropped it, the world got quieter and poorer. Here is the detail that stings. In his final years, ODB had been slowly finding his way back. He had signed to Rockefeller, the label that Big L never reached, and he had been recording again, promising the world that the old fire was still in there. The album he was making in that New York studio on his last night was meant to be the return. The sessions from those final months leaked out over the following years in fragments, unfinished, uneven, unmistakably him. The curse of Nigga Please is that it captures the chaos at full power, the last time the lightning was fully in the bottle, before the bottle started to slip from his hands. Mac Miller, Circles. Malcolm McCormick spent his whole career being underestimated. The frat rap kid who became one of the most respected producer artists of his generation, Mac Miller made Swimming in 2018, an album about struggling upward, about treading water, about trying to reach the surface. He was deep into its companion album Circles when he died of an accidental overdose on September the 7th, 2018. He was 26. Producer John Breon, who had been working with him on the record, finished Circles after his death, using the sessions they had completed together. Released in January 2020, Circles completes the sentence Swimming started. The two albums together form a single arc, a man describing his own fight to stay afloat, and the water closing over him between records. Listening to them back to back is one of the hardest experiences in modern music. The final track, Once a Day, contains the line about sailing on the darkest winds. He wrote his own ending without knowing it, and the album arrived to deliver it. The family announcement of the album came through his own Instagram account, a message from the dead to the living, and the internet stopped for a day. What makes Circles uniquely devastating is that it was not assembled from scraps. It was a real album, intended, sequenced, nearly complete, and the man who made it considered it finished enough that its release was already being planned. The curse is that the companion piece works. Swimming and Circles belong together, and together they say the thing he could not say directly. The surface he was swimming toward was not the surface. Every fan who plays them back to back arrives at the same quiet realization that the two albums were always one album, and it ends underwater. XXXTentacion, Skins. Jose Onfroy was the most controversial figure of the SoundCloud era, a young man with a violent history and a fan base that saw him as a tortured prophet. He was 20 years old and awaiting trial when, on June the 18th, 2018, he was shot and killed in an apparent robbery outside a motorcycle dealership in Broward County, Florida. His album Skins was nearly finished. Released 6 months after his death, it is only 19 minutes long, 10 tracks, most of them fragments, the sketches of a record that was never allowed to become itself. The brevity is the tragedy made audible. This is not a completed statement. It is a voice cut off mid-sentence, and the world will never hear the rest. His earlier album, which had debuted at #1 while he was alive, had already made him the defining voice of a generation in pain. Skins is what remains when that voice is silenced at 20, and the debate over his legacy rages to this day. Pop Smoke, Shoot for the Stars, Aim for the Moon. Bashar Jackson was 20 years old, the hottest new voice in New York, the man who made drill music a global sound. His mixtape Meet the Woo 2 had just dropped on February the 7th, 2020. 12 days later, on February the 19th, he was shot and killed during a home invasion at a rented house in the Hollywood Hills. The murder, later tied to a gang robbery crew, may have been spurred by his own social media posts revealing the address where he was staying. His debut studio album was nearly finished. 50 Cent, his mentor and hero, completed it, calling the featured artists himself, holding the deadlines, finishing what his friend could not. Released in July 2020, Shoot for the Stars, Aim for the Moon debuted at number 1 and stayed at the top of the charts for months. 50 Cent then fulfilled a promise Pop Smoke had made in life, taking the young man's mother to an awards show as his guest. The album that was meant to launch a career instead became a monument to one, and the voice that defined New York's new sound exists forever at 20. MF Doom, born like this. Daniel Dumoulin was hip-hop's phantom, the man in the metal mask who never showed his face, who sent stand-ins to perform his shows, who built a mythology so complete that the mask outgrew the man. His albums, from Operation Doomsday to Food, are considered some of the greatest works in the genre's history. On October the 31st, 2020, Halloween, the day that belonged to him, Daniel Dumoulin died. He was 49. The world did not learn of his death until December the 31st, 2 months later, when his wife announced it on his Instagram. He had died in secret, the way he had lived, the phantom to the very end. The albums he left behind carry the strangest curse of all, not death surrounding the music, but the music outliving the mystery. Every Doom record now plays differently, knowing the man inside the mask made his final exit in silence, and no one even knew the show was over. 8 albums. 8 different kinds of cursed. Some carry real murders in their making. Some carry the voices of men who rapped about their own ends and met them. Some were finished by friends because the artist could not finish them himself. One was recorded by a man in 7 days, about 7 days 1 month before the 7th day of his life ended. The music is real, the deaths are real, the grief inside these records is not performance. That is what separates these albums from the ones that only pretend to be dark. These did not have to pretend. The curse was already in the room, and the microphone recorded it.